Dust caked the rims of Vanessa's custom Mercedes, a gritty, pale insult to the pristine black paint. She hated this valley. She hated the smell of manure baking in the August heat, and she especially hated the rusted, sputtering tractor blocking her path. Behind the wheel sat a man in faded denim, completely oblivious to the fact he was delaying a billionaire. She laid on the horn, ready to crush a local. She didn't know she was honking at the king of the county. Heat shimmered off the cracked asphalt of County Road, 9 warping the horizon into a watery mirage. Inside the climate-controlled cabin of the Mercedes Maybach, it was exactly 68 degrees. Vanessa sat in the back, a tablet resting on her crossed knees, her fingers drumming a frantic, arrhythmic beat against the leather armrest. She smelled of expensive, sterile things, sandalwood perfume, freshly printed contracts, and the faint ozone of overworked electronics. Outside, the world was a sprawling, chaotic mess of green and brown. The Montana summer was unforgiving. It smelled of dry pine, hot dirt, and impending thunderstorms. Vanessa didn't care about the scenery. She cared about the signal bar on her phone, which had just dropped from 1 to 0. "Greg," she snapped, not looking up from her blank screen. "Tell me we aren't lost." In the driver's seat, Greg, a man whose tailored suit looked ridiculous against the backdrop of rolling cattle pastures, cleared his throat. "We aren't lost, Ms. Rhodes. The GPS says we are 3 miles from the summit site." But what? "There's an obstruction." Vanessa finally looked up. Through the tinted windshield, the road narrowed into a single lane, flanked by deep irrigation ditches, choking with wild mustard weed. Dead ahead, moving at a speed that could only be described as geological, was a tractor. It wasn't a modern piece of agricultural equipment. It was a relic. The paint, which might have been green a few decades ago, was now a mottled, sun-bleached rust. Black smoke coughed sporadically from its vertical exhaust pipe, smelling sharply of unburned diesel and hot metal. "Pass him," Vanessa said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a tone that usually sent her board of directors scrambling. "I can't. The ditch is too steep on the left, and there's a blind curve ahead." Greg's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Vanessa closed her eyes, pressing 2 perfectly manicured fingers against the bridge of her nose. A dull throb was beginning to form behind her eyes. She was the CEO of Rhodes Hospitality. She managed a portfolio worth $8 billion. She routinely tore down historical landmarks to build luxury eco-resorts for people who wanted to pretend to care about the environment while sipping champagne flown in from France. She did not have time to sit behind a piece of rolling scrap metal. "Honk," she ordered. Greg tapped the horn, a polite, muffled bleat. The tractor didn't speed up. If anything, it seemed to slow down. "Move over," Vanessa muttered, unbuckling her seatbelt and shoving her way into the narrow space between the front seats. She slammed her palm against the center of the steering wheel. The Maybach's horn blared a loud, aggressive klaxon that shattered the quiet rural afternoon. On the tractor, the driver didn't flinch. He just kept his hand resting lazily on the steering wheel, his shoulders relaxed beneath a faded, sweat-stained gray t-shirt. A battered canvas cap hid his hair, and the back of his neck was flushed red from the sun. Nestled between his legs, holding onto the center console, was a small boy, maybe 5 years old, wearing bright red noise-cancelling earmuffs. The kid turned around, staring at the aggressive black car with wide, sticky-faced curiosity. He was holding a half-melted orange popsicle. Vanessa felt a flare of irrational anger, not just at the delay, but at the sheer lack of urgency in these people. The world was moving, shifting, transacting millions of dollars a second, and this man was crawling down a public road like time was infinite. "Pull over," Vanessa said, her voice dropping into a dangerous register. "Right now. The tractor coughed, jerked, and suddenly, with a horrific metallic grinding noise, stopped dead in the middle of the road. A thick cloud of white smoke billowed from beneath its rusted hood. Vanessa stared. "You have got to be kidding me." Greg put the car in park. "Looks like he broke a belt, ma'am." "I don't care if he broke his transmission. Get out there and tell him to push it into the ditch." Before Greg could reach for the door handle, Vanessa was already out. The heat hit her like a physical blow, heavy and suffocating. The air tasted like dust and exhaust. The gravel crunched loudly beneath her $400 Italian loafers as she marched toward the tractor. The man was already off the machine. He had lifted the boy down and set him on the grassy shoulder. He popped the latches on the tractor's hood, hauling the heavy metal back with a groan of hinges. "Excuse me," Vanessa said. The man didn't turn around. He reached into the smoking engine cavity with a bare hand, probing the greasy metal. "Give it a minute," he said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and entirely unbothered. It lacked the frantic deference Vanessa was used to. "I don't have a minute," Vanessa snapped, crossing her arms. She noticed the grease smeared across his knuckles, the fraying hems of his jeans. "You are blocking a public thoroughfare. I have a meeting in exactly 20 minutes, and you are going to move this junk." The man finally turned. He wiped a hand across his forehead, leaving a streak of black grease just above his left eyebrow. He looked to be in his late 30s. His eyes were a startling pale grey, catching the harsh sunlight. They were tired eyes crinkled at the corners, deeply assessing. He looked at her loafers, her crisp linen trousers, the silk blouse that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, and finally her face. He didn't look impressed. He looked mildly annoyed. "It's a busted fan belt," he said, pulling a frayed loop of black rubber from the engine to show her. "Can't move it without overheating and cracking the block. Tow truck's gonna take at least an hour out here." "An hour?" Vanessa laughed, a short, humorless sound. "I am not sitting on the side of a dirt road for an hour. Push it." "It weighs 4,000 pounds, the man said evenly. "Unless you've got a lot of hidden upper body strength in that silk shirt, it ain't moving." The little boy on the grass pulled off his earmuffs. "Dad, the tractor died again." "I know Lancelot. Keep eating your popsicle before it melts on your shoes." The man turned back to Vanessa. "You can back up. There's a turnaround about a mile back. Take the old logging road around the ridge. It'll add 20 minutes, but you'll get where you're going." Vanessa felt a hot flush of rage climb her neck. She reached into her designer handbag, her fingers finding her leather wallet. She pulled out a crisp $100 bill and shoved it toward his chest. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "Take this. Buy a new belt. Buy a whole new engine. I don't care. Just get this pathetic excuse for a machine out of my way." The man looked at the money. He didn't reach for it. The wind rustled the dry grass in the ditch. The silence stretched heavy and uncomfortable. He looked back up at her, and the grey eyes were completely cold. "Keep your money, lady. Out here, paper doesn't fix a busted water pump." He turned his back to her, leaning over the engine again. Vanessa stood there, her arm extended, the $100 bill fluttering uselessly in the hot breeze. A profound sense of foolishness washed over her, instantly replaced by defensive fury. She let the bill drop onto the dusty tire of the tractor, spun on her heel, and marched back to the Maybach. "Back up," she ordered Greg, slamming the heavy door shut. "Find the logging road, now!" As the car reversed, chewing up the gravel, Vanessa looked out the window. The man was still leaning over the engine. He hadn't even looked down at the money. The summit site was supposed to be Vanessa's crowning achievement. It was a sprawling 3,000-acre parcel of land sitting at the base of the Bitterroot Mountains. For 2 years, Rhodes Hospitality had poured $80 million into grading the land-laying foundations and erecting the skeletal frames of what would become a hyper-exclusive wilderness retreat. When the Maybach finally rolled up to the construction trailers, Vanessa's mood was foul. Her shoes were dusty, her head was pounding, and she could still smell the acrid diesel smoke on her clothes. She walked into the air-conditioned trailer. The contrast was jarring outside. It was a rugged, unfinished wilderness. Inside it was a sterile, brightly lit war room of architectural blueprints, topographical maps, and stressed executives. Her lead project manager, a nervous man named David, practically jumped out of his chair when she entered. "Ms. Rhodes, you're late. Was there an issue on the road?" "Local wildlife," Vanessa muttered, dropping her bag onto the laminate conference table. "Give me the status report. Tell me we are on schedule for the spring launch." David swallowed hard. He looked at the other engineers in the room. Nobody met Vanessa's eye. The silence in the trailer was thick, heavy with impending disaster. Vanessa stopped moving. She let her hands rest flat on the table, leaning forward. "David, why does everyone in this room look like they're attending a funeral?" David cleared his throat, pulling a large rolled map from a plastic tube. He spread it across the table, weighting the corners with coffee mugs. It was a topographical map of the valley. Red lines marked the boundaries of Rhodes' hospitality land. Blue lines marked the river. "It's the water rights, Vanessa," David said, dropping the formalities. "And the access easement. I thought we secured those a year ago. We secured the rights to draw from the upper aquifer. But the State Environmental Board just did a review. Because of the drought, they're limiting our draw. We won't have enough water pressure to run the spa, the pools, or even guarantee running water to the outer cabins during peak summer months." Vanessa felt a cold weight drop into her stomach. "Solutions. Give me solutions. We can pipe it in. We can build a reservoir." "We can't," a structural engineer chimed in from the back. "Not on our land. The gradient is wrong." David pointed a trembling finger at a massive swathe of green space on the map directly adjacent to their red boundaries. The green space bordered the river. "There's only one way. We need an easement through the neighboring property. We need to lay a pipeline through their lower pasture, and we need to buy their surplus water rights. If we don't, the resort is dead in the water. Literally." Vanessa stared at the massive green space. It was huge. It dwarfed her 3,000-acre plot. "Who owns it?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "It's the Whispering Pines Ranch," David said, opening a manila folder. "Been in the same family for 4 generations. It's not just a hobby farm. It's a massive, fully operational cattle and agriculture empire. We estimate the land value alone, not counting the livestock, and infrastructure, is north of 120 million. Vanessa blinked. 120 million. That wasn't a local yokel. That was serious institutional wealth. "Have you contacted the owner?" she asked. "Yes. We've sent 6 letters, left dozens of voicemails. We even sent a local broker to make a preliminary offer for the easement. $2 million just for the right to dig a trench. And the broker was escorted off the property by a foreman," David said miserably. "The owner is a ghost. He doesn't go to town council meetings, he doesn't socialize. His lawyers handle everything, and his lawyers are a massive firm in Chicago that just stonewall us. The name on the deed is a trust, but the primary beneficiary is an E. Boone." Vanessa felt a headache blooming into a full migraine. Her entire resort, her legacy, the project she had staked her reputation on with the board, was being held hostage by a reclusive rancher who didn't want to check his mail. "Fine," Vanessa said, her voice turning to ice. "If his lawyers won't talk, I will. I didn't build an $8 billion company by letting some solitary cowboy play hardball. Where is the main house?" David pointed to a spot on the map about 5 miles down the valley. "But Vanessa, you can't just drive up there. There are gates, security." "Watch me," she said. She grabbed her bag. Greg, keep the engine running. As she walked back out into the blistering heat, she felt the familiar, toxic rush of adrenaline. This was what she was good at. Confrontation, negotiation, finding a person's price and exploiting it. Everyone had a price. Mr. E. Boone was about to find out what his was. She got into the back of the Maybach. Whispering Pines Ranch Greg. Step on it. The drive took less than 10 minutes. When they pulled up to the property line, Vanessa immediately noticed the shift in the landscape. The county road had been potholed and dusty. The moment they crossed into Boone territory, the road turned to smooth, perfectly graded crushed limestone. There was a gate. It wasn't a tacky, ornate iron gate showing off wealth. It was made of massive, rough-hewn timber and thick steel cable. It looked impenetrable. There was a simple intercom box mounted on a wooden post. Greg rolled down his window and pressed the button. Static hissed. Then a woman's voice answered, crisp and professional. Whispering Pines, Vanessa Rhodes. Vanessa called out from the back seat, leaning forward. CEO of Rhodes Hospitality. I need to speak with Mr. Boone. It's a matter of immense financial mutual benefit. There was a long pause. The static hummed. Vanessa held her breath, expecting a dial tone. Instead, there was a heavy mechanical clunk, and the massive timber gates slowly swung open inward. Proceed to the main house, the voice said. Follow the river. Vanessa leaned back against the leather, a triumphant smirk touching the corner of her mouth. Everyone has a price. The drive up to the main house destroyed any remaining illusions Vanessa had about this being a simple country farm. The crushed limestone road wound for miles through pristine, irrigated pastures. Hundreds of black Angus cattle grazed lazily in the shade of ancient cottonwood trees. In the distance, massive state-of-the-art aluminum barns and a fleet of modern GPS-guided machinery signaled a highly sophisticated agricultural empire. The air here was entirely different. The choking dust of the county road was gone, replaced by the cool, rich scent of river water and sweet alfalfa. When the house finally came into view, Vanessa held her breath. It was a sprawling architectural masterpiece of glass, steel, and native stone built seamlessly into the side of a sloping hill. It didn't shout its value. It simply existed in a state of quiet superiority. Greg parked the Maybach in a circular driveway paved with dark slate. Vanessa stepped out, abruptly hyper-aware of how wrinkled her linen pants had become during the day's travel. She brushed invisible dust from her trousers, masking her sudden intimidation with cold, practiced authority as she walked up the wide stone steps. Before she could knock, the heavy oak door opened. A woman in a neat polo shirt held a tablet. Ms. Rhodes, I'm Maria, the estate manager. Mr. Boone is out back on the terrace. Vanessa gave a curt nod and followed. The interior was breathtaking vaulted ceilings with exposed timber beams and wide plank walnut floors that echoed softly under her hard soles. Maria opened a set of glass sliding doors leading to a shaded stone terrace overlooking the winding river. He's right out here, Maria said, stepping aside. Vanessa stepped out into the dry, warm air. At the edge of the stone patio, leaning against the railing with his back to her, was a man. He wore clean, dark denim and a fitted white Henley, holding a glass of iced tea. Mr. Boone, Vanessa said, her voice projecting clear and commanding. Thank you for seeing me. I know you prefer your privacy, so I'll be brief. My company is prepared to offer you an exorbitant sum for a simple, subsurface water easement. The man took a slow sip. The ice clinked gently against the glass. He set the glass down on the stone railing and turned around slowly. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. The carefully rehearsed pitch died instantly on her tongue. It was him. The grease on his forehead was scrubbed clean. The faded canvas cap was missing. but the striking, cold grey eyes were exactly the same. He looked at her entirely unreadable, completely devoid of surprise. It was the man from the tractor. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the terrace. The only sound was the distant rush of the river and the gentle rustle of cottonwood leaves. Vanessa felt a sharp pressure behind her ribs, as if the oxygen in the air had suddenly become too thin to breathe. "You," she breathed. Elias Boone leaned back against the stone railing, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at her immaculate outfit, then at her pale face. "Ms. Rhodes," Elias said. His gravelly voice was smooth, completely lacking the deference she was used to demanding. He reached into his front pocket, took 2 steps toward her, and extended his hand. Pinched between his calloused fingers was a $100 bill, marked with a smudge of black grease right in the center. "You dropped this," he said softly. Vanessa stared at the bill. The heat of humiliation flushed violently up her neck and into her cheeks. Her fingers felt numb. She couldn't move her arms. The power dynamic had completely inverted, trapping her beneath its sudden weight. That tractor!" Vanessa stammered, her voice losing its sharp corporate edge, sounding uncharacteristically small. "You were driving a piece of scrap on a public road. My grandfather's 1968 John Deere 4020, Elias corrected evenly. "I've been restoring it with my son. Belts are tricky." Vanessa looked past him at the miles of high-tech farm equipment. The crushing realization of her own arrogance tasted metallic on her tongue. "You knew who I was." "On the road. I saw the Rhodes Hospitality logo on your driver's shirt," Elias said, dropping the bill onto a teak coffee table between them. "I knew why you were in my valley, and I knew exactly how you viewed the people who live here." Vanessa swallowed hard. Her instinct was to attack, to deflect, to double down on her status. But standing on his flawless stone terrace, her corporate armor felt paper-thin. "I apologize," she forced out. The words felt like gravel in her throat. "I was stressed. We are on a tight timeline." Elias chuckled a dry, cynical sound without warmth. "You aren't sorry you insulted a man on a tractor, Ms. Rhodes. You're sorry that the man on the tractor holds the deed to your water rights." She flinched. The rawness of the truth stung. She looked away from his piercing eyes, staring instead at the smudge of grease on the money. "Look," she said, trying to steady her breathing. "Let's separate the personal from the professional. I need an easement. I am willing to pay $10 million for the right to lay a pipe through your lower pasture. It won't disrupt your operations. It's clean money." Elias turned away, picking his tea back up. He looked out over the river, his jaw ticking. $10 million, he mused. "That's a lot of money." "It's a very generous offer." He turned back to face her. His eyes were grounded in a quiet, immovable certainty. "My great-grandfather bought this land in 1912. He dug the first irrigation trenches by hand. My father died pulling a calf in a blizzard in that exact lower pasture. This isn't an asset to me, Ms. Rhodes. This is my blood." Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, to raise the price, to do what she always did. "The answer is no," Elias said softly. "Not for 10 million. Not for 100 million. I don't want your resort here. And I certainly don't want to do business with someone who throws money at people like they're stray dogs." Vanessa stood frozen. The wind off the river picked up cool and indifferent. She had come here to conquer a rural holdout. Instead, she had just met the one man in Montana who couldn't be bought. Silence hung in the Maybach, all the way back to the temporary field office. Vanessa stared out the tinted window, her jaw set so tight her teeth ached. The landscape that had previously looked like a blank canvas for her ambition now felt hostile, mocking her. The rolling hills and deep green pastures weren't just dirt and grass. They were a fortress, and Elias Boone held the only key. She didn't fly back to New York. Retreating would mean admitting defeat to a board of directors who were already whispering that she was too young, too aggressive, and too female to handle the $80 million summit site crisis. Instead, she ordered Greg to drop her off at the Copper Creek Motor Inn, the only lodging within a 30-mile radius of the construction site. Her suite was a cramped, wood-paneled room that smelled faintly of industrial pine cleaner and stale cigarette smoke from a bygone decade. The air conditioning unit in the window rattled with a violent asthmatic wheeze. Vanessa sat on the edge of a mattress that sagged in the middle, her $400 Italian loafers resting on a threadbare carpet. She opened her laptop. The screen cast a harsh blue glare in the dim room. Emails were piling up. Cost overruns, idle contractor fees, panicked messages from David about the environmental board's impending deadline. Vanessa pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. A bitter, cynical laugh scraped its way out of her throat. $8 billion in managed assets, and she was being stonewalled by a man who drove a 50-year-old tractor. She spent the next 4 hours doing what she did best, tearing into the data. If money couldn't buy Elias Boone, she needed to find out what could. She pulled up property tax records, satellite surveys, and local zoning ordinances. She dug into the trust that owned the Whispering Pines Ranch. The picture that emerged wasn't of a stubborn hillbilly, but of an incredibly shrewd operation. Elias had taken over the ranch 12 years ago, after his father passed. He had modernized the logistics, pivoted to sustainable grazing practices, and increased the yield by 30% without buying a single extra acre. But there was a gap. The records showed a massive loan taken out 5 years ago. Medical debt. Vanessa leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. She cross-referenced local obituaries. Sarah Boone, Elias's wife, died 4 years ago. A prolonged battle with an aggressive, rare neurological disease. The kind of illness that drained bank accounts, even vast ones, and left behind a mountain of specialized clinical bills. A cold, calculating thrill shot through Vanessa. There it was, the leverage, the crack in the armor. She could offer to wipe out the remaining debt. She could frame it as a philanthropic grant from the Rhodes Foundation. It was the perfect corporate maneuver, clean, tax-deductible, and entirely manipulative. But as she reached for her phone to call her legal team, she stopped. She remembered the look in Elias's grey eyes on the terrace. Out here, paper doesn't fix a busted water pump. She remembered the grease on the $100 bill. If she walked up to him with a spreadsheet of his dead wife's medical debts, he wouldn't just kick her off the property. He would likely shoot out the tires of her car. Vanessa dropped the phone onto the cheap polyester bedspread. For the first time in her career, she had absolutely no idea what her next move should be. She couldn't bully him. She couldn't buy him. And she certainly couldn't out-stubborn him. The next morning, Vanessa dressed in the most subdued clothes she had packed: dark jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and a pair of clean leather boots she had bought in Aspen for a photo op. She tied her hair back in a tight, severe ponytail. She drove the rental SUV herself, leaving Greg at the motel. She didn't head to the construction site. She drove into the small town of Copper Creek. It was a single main street lined with brick facades, a hardware store, a feed supply, and a diner called Ruby's. Vanessa parked the SUV between 2 mud-splattered pickup trucks. She walked into the diner. The bell above the door jingled sharply. The air inside was thick with the smell of sizzling bacon grease, scorched filter coffee, and damp wool. A dozen heads turned to look at her. The locals recognized an outsider the way a dog recognizes a wolf. She ignored the stares, sliding into a cracked red vinyl booth in the back corner. She ordered a black coffee from a waitress who looked older than the diner itself. The coffee arrived in a thick ceramic mug. It tasted like battery acid and burnt toast. Vanessa drank it without flinching. 10 minutes later, the door jingled again. Vanessa tensed. Elias walked in. He was wearing heavy canvas work pants, scuffed boots, and a denim jacket. He looked exhausted. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and he moved with a stiff, mechanical slowness that spoke of a deep, physical ache. Trailing behind him was Lancelot, holding a small plastic dinosaur. Elias didn't see her. He sat at the counter, lifting Lancelot onto the stool beside him. He ordered 2 plates of pancakes, his voice low and raspy. Vanessa watched them. She watched Elias cut the pancakes into tiny, manageable squares for his son, moving the syrup dispenser out of the boy's immediate reach with the practiced reflex of a veteran parent. She watched the way the waitress patted Elias on the shoulder, the quiet, unspoken solidarity of the town wrapping around him. She felt like an invader, a parasite looking for a host. The feeling was profoundly uncomfortable, clashing violently with her ego. Vanessa stood up before she could talk herself out of it. She walked over to the counter. The heavy tread of her boots on the linoleum floor announced her approach. Elias turned his head. The exhaustion in his eyes instantly hardened into a sharp, defensive glare. His posture shifted, subtly blocking Lancelot from her line of sight. "Ms. Rhodes," he said, his voice dropping a full octave. "If your lawyers sent you to harass me while I'm feeding my kid, I'm going to have the sheriff escort you back to the city limits." "My lawyers don't know I'm here," Vanessa said, keeping her voice low. She didn't sit down. She stood beside his stool, feeling awkwardly tall. "I came to apologize. Properly." Elias picked up his coffee mug. He took a slow sip, not taking his eyes off her. "You apologized yesterday, right before you offered me $10 million. That was a transaction. This is an apology." Vanessa crossed her arms, digging her fingernails into her own biceps. She hated being vulnerable. It felt like walking naked through a blizzard. "I acted like an entitled, arrogant amateur on the road. I treated you like an obstacle instead of a person. It was unprofessional, and it was rude." Elias stared at her. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the clatter of silverware and the low hum of the diner's refrigerator. He was looking for the angle. She knew he was. He was waiting for the but. "You're the angry lady," a small voice piped up. Vanessa looked down. Lancelot had leaned around his father's solid frame, clutching his plastic dinosaur. His face was smeared with maple syrup, his eyes wide and curious. Vanessa felt a jolt of panic. She didn't do kids. She didn't know how to talk to them, how to look at them. They were unpredictable variables. "Yes," Vanessa said stiffly. "I am the angry lady." "Why were you honking?" Lancelot asked, dipping the dinosaur's tail into a pool of syrup. "Because I was in a hurry," Vanessa said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I was trying to get somewhere important, and I forgot that other people have important things to do too. It was a mistake." Lancelot considered this, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of pancake. "Dad's tractor breaks a lot. It's a piece of junk." Elias shot his son a look. "Hey, don't insult the 4020. We just need to machine a new pulley." "It smokes, Dad." "It has character." Elias countered, a faint, genuine smile touching the corner of his mouth for the first time. Vanessa watched the interaction, the tight coil of anxiety in her chest loosening just a fraction. There was a warmth here, a solid, grounding reality that made her $8 billion portfolio feel bizarrely insignificant. Elias turned back to her, the smile fading, replaced by a weary pragmatism. "Look, I appreciate the apology. I do. It takes spine to walk in here and say that. But if you think this changes the answer about the easement, you're wasting your morning." Vanessa uncrossed her arms. She let out a long, slow breath. "I know about the debt, Elias." The air around them instantly froze. Elias didn't move, but the tension radiating from him was suddenly lethal. His knuckles turned white against the handle of his coffee mug. "Excuse me," he whispered. The softness of his voice was terrifying. Vanessa kept her eyes locked on his, refusing to back down, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "I did a background check on the trust. I saw the liens. I know what happened with your wife. I am deeply sorry for your loss." Elias stood up. He was several inches taller than her, and the sheer physical presence of him was overwhelming. "You have exactly 5 seconds to walk away from me before I lose my temper in front of my son." "I am not going to offer to pay it," Vanessa said rapidly, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "I'm not going to leverage it. I'm not going to bring it up to my board or your bank or anyone else." Elias stopped. He hovered over her, his chest rising and falling heavily. "Then why the hell are you bringing it up to me? Because I need you to understand that I am desperate," Vanessa said, her voice cracking slightly, the polished corporate facade finally shattering. "I am going to lose everything if I don't get that water. My job, my equity, my reputation. The board is looking for an excuse to push me out, and this is it. I looked at your debt because I was looking for a way to break you. But I realized I can't. I can't break you, Elias. You've already survived worse." She stopped breathing hard, the smell of bacon grease and bitter coffee filling her lungs. She had just handed him every card in her deck. She had just given him the power to ruin her. Elias stared at her. The anger in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by a profound dissecting curiosity. He looked at the harsh lines of tension around her mouth, the exhaustion in her eyes that matched his own. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a CEO. He was looking at a person standing on the edge of a cliff. He sat back down. He picked up a napkin and wiped the syrup off Lancelot's chin. "You're a shark, Ms. Rhodes," Elias said, quietly not looking at her. "You do whatever it takes to survive." "I try," she whispered. "I don't like sharks." Elias threw the napkin onto the plate. He turned his head, looking at her with those pale, unyielding grey eyes. "But I respect someone who admits they're drowning." Vanessa didn't speak. She didn't dare break the fragile shift in the atmosphere. "I don't want your money," Elias said. "And I don't want your resort on my fence line. But I know what it feels like to have your back against the wall, fighting to keep something you built." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He threw a $5 bill on the counter to cover the coffee she had ordered. 5 a.m. tomorrow, Elias said, standing up and lifting Lancelot off the stool. "Come to the main gate. Wear those boots, but expect them to get ruined. You want my water, you're going to have to understand exactly what you're asking me to give up." Vanessa watched him walk out of the diner, the bell jingling cheerfully in his wake. She looked down at the $5 bill on the counter. She had just been given a lifeline, and it was entirely covered in dirt. 5 a.m. in Montana wasn't just dark. It was aggressively hostile. The headlights of Vanessa's rental SUV cut a pale, bouncing cone through the pitch black as she idled at the Whispering Pines gate. The dashboard thermometer read 38 degrees. It was late August, but the valley floor held the cold like a stone basin. The heavy timber gate groaned open. Vanessa drove through the tires, crunching loudly on the limestone. She didn't go to the main house. Following the instructions Elias had texted her at midnight, she parked by the massive aluminum equipment barns. Elias was already working. The harsh halogen floodlights of the barn illuminated him in stark relief. He was backing a utility ATV out of a bay, the engine a low guttural thrum in the quiet morning. He wore a heavy canvas coat, insulated leather gloves, and a battered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. Vanessa stepped out of the SUV. The cold hit her instantly, biting through her thin black t-shirt and the light denim jacket she'd bought at the motel gift shop. Elias killed the ATV engine. He looked her up and down. His eyes lingered on her pristine aspen leather boots. He reached into a plastic bin strapped to the back of the ATV and tossed something at her. Vanessa caught it against her chest, a pair of thick, insulated rubber work gloves. They smelled strongly of lanolin, old dirt, and machine oil. "Put them on," Elias said, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "Get in." Vanessa didn't argue. She shoved her hands into the stiff gloves. They were 2 sizes too big, cumbersome and heavy. She climbed into the passenger seat of the open-air ATV. The vinyl seat was hard and freezing. Elias shifted into gear and hit the throttle. They shot forward, leaving the limestone road and plunging directly into the darkness of the open pastures. The wind was brutal. It whipped Vanessa's hair around her face, stinging her cheeks and watering her eyes. She gripped the plastic roll bar above her head, her knuckles aching inside the oversized gloves. They hit a rut, and the ATV slammed downward, jarring her spine. Elias didn't slow down. He drove by memory, navigating the black expanse of the ranch with an innate, terrifying confidence. They drove for 20 minutes. The smell of the air changed from dry dust to something heavy, wet, and green. It smelled like decay and life happening simultaneously. Elias slammed on the brakes. The ATV skidded to a halt in the thick, wet grass. He grabbed a heavy steel pry bar from the back and stepped out. "We're in the lower pasture," Elias said, his voice loud over the idling engine. "The one you want to run your pipeline through. The river is 100 yards that way. The irrigation diversion channel is right here." Vanessa climbed out. Her boots hit the ground and immediately sank 2 inches into thick, freezing mud. The cold seeped through the leather in seconds. Elias clicked on a heavy-duty flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating a concrete sluice gate set into a deep trench of rushing black water. The metal wheel that operated the gate was jammed tight, clogged with massive twisted branches and thick mats of dead riverweed brought in by the current. "The water table here is shallow," Elias said, walking toward the trench. "The aquifer feeds the roots from below, and this channel regulates the surface flow. If this gate stays jammed, the water backs up, floods the calving pens downstream, and we lose 50 acres of winter feed to root rot. We have to clear it." He didn't ask her to watch. He stepped down into the mud on the bank, shoved the pry bar into the jammed wheel, and leaned his entire body weight against it. The metal groaned, but didn't budge. "Grab that branch," Elias grunted, nodding his head toward a thick, waterlogged cottonwood limb wedged in the gears. Vanessa stepped forward. Her left boot sank up to the ankle, the suction making a loud, wet pop. She almost lost her balance. She scrambled down the slick bank, the freezing mud coating her expensive jeans. She reached out with her clumsy gloved hands and grabbed the branch. It was freezing. The wood was slimy, coated in algae, and incredibly heavy. "Pull," Elias commanded. Vanessa pulled. Her boots slid in the mud. She braced her feet, leaning back, using her core. The cold water splashed up, soaking her thighs. The branch shifted an inch. "Harder," Elias snapped. She let out a short, frustrated breath and hauled backward with everything she had. Her foot slipped entirely. She fell hard on her backside into the freezing, wet mud. The branch broke free, tumbling over her legs. At the exact same moment, Elias threw his weight onto the pry bar. With a violent screech of metal, the wheel turned. The sluice gate lifted. A massive rush of black water surged through the channel, foaming aggressively as it cleared the jam. Vanessa sat in the mud. Her hands were numb. Her jeans were soaked through with freezing water and slime. Her left boot was completely ruined, the leather deeply stained and warped. She expected Elias to laugh. She expected a smug lecture about city girls and country work. Instead, he walked over, reached down, and grabbed her forearm. He hauled her to her feet with one smooth, powerful motion. "You didn't complain." He noted his voice, flat, but the hard edge was gone. "Complaining doesn't move the branch," Vanessa said. Her teeth were chattering so violently she had to clench her jaw to speak clearly. She wiped a streak of mud off her cheek with the back of her bulky glove, smearing it further. Elias looked at her face. In the harsh glare of the flashlight, stripped of her designer clothes and corporate armor, standing knee-deep in freezing mud, she looked completely out of her element. But her eyes were furious, blazing with an intense, stubborn refusal to be broken. Elias reached up and adjusted his Stetson. "Let's go watch the sun come up." They sat on the tailgate of the ATV. The heater from the engine block radiated a faint, desperate warmth against Vanessa's frozen calves. She held a dented aluminum thermos of black coffee Elias had poured for her. It was scalding hot and tasted like burnt chicory, but she drank it like it was a life-saving elixir. Slowly, agonizingly, the horizon began to bleed grey. Then a bruised purple, and finally, a blinding liquid gold. As the sun crested the jagged peaks of the bitter roots, the lower pasture revealed itself to Vanessa. It wasn't just a field. It was a massive breathing basin of life. Mist rose off the thick emerald grass in curling ribbons. Hundreds of cattle were scattered across the expanse, moving slowly, their breath puffing in the crisp air. The river wound along the edge, a ribbon of crushed silver, catching the dawn light. The smell of the mud faded, replaced by the sharp, clean scent of crushed sage and warming earth. It was overwhelmingly, brutally beautiful. It made the sleek architectural renderings of her $80 million eco-resort look like cheap plastic toys. "Your engineers looked at a satellite map," Elias said, quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He was nursing his own cup of coffee. They saw a flat piece of dirt and thought, "That's the easiest path for a pipe." They didn't test the soil composition. Vanessa looked at him. "The soil, it's alluvial," Elias explained. "Glacial till and river silt. It's incredibly porous. The entire ecosystem of this lower basin relies on the water table sitting exactly where it is. If you dig an 8-foot trench through the middle of it, you don't just bury a pipe. You sever the capillary action of the soil. You create a subterranean dam. Half this pasture will flood every spring, and the other half will turn to dust by July." He pointed a gloved finger toward a massive, ancient cottonwood tree standing solitary in the middle of the field. Its bark was deeply grooved, its branches skeletal against the morning sky. "That's where my dad died," Elias said. The words were simple, factual, entirely devoid of self-pity. "Spring blizzard of '98. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 2 hours. We had 70 heifers dropping calves. He was out here pulling them in the snow. Tractor died. He stayed with a calf, trying to keep it warm. His heart gave out from the cold." Vanessa stared at the tree. A heavy, suffocating tightness gripped her chest. She thought about her development maps, the thick red line drawn right through that exact spot by a kid in a Chicago office who had never stepped foot in mud. "My wife, Sarah," Elias continued, his voice dropping slightly. "Before her hand stopped working, she planted wild blue flax along the riverbank over there. It blooms for exactly 3 weeks in June. It's the only thing Lancelot asks to see when spring comes." He finally turned his head to look at her. The pale grey eyes were stripping her bare. "You asked me yesterday to separate the personal from the professional, Ms. Rhodes," Elias said. Out here there is no separation. The dirt is personal. The water is personal. When you ask me for an easement, you aren't asking me for a business transaction. You're asking me to let you run an excavator through my father's grave and my wife's garden, so you can fill hot tubs for people who will visit for 3 days, and never think about this valley again. Vanessa looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were bleeding a small, jagged scrape from the icy branch, the blood mixing with the drying mud on her skin. She had spent her entire adult life operating on the premise that everything was a calculation. Profit-loss, risk-reward. She had climbed to the top of a male-dominated industry by being colder, faster, and more ruthless than the men around her. She had built a fortress of wealth and status to ensure she would never have to feel small or powerless. But sitting here soaked to the bone, smelling of cow manure and river muck, her billions of dollars felt entirely useless. "I didn't know," Vanessa whispered. It was the truest thing she had ever said in a negotiation. "I know you didn't," Elias replied. "That's why I brought you out here." "If I don't get the water," Vanessa swallowed hard, the vulnerability tasting like ash in her mouth. "If this project fails, the board will vote me out. I won't just lose my job. I lose my shares. I lose the company I sacrificed my entire life to build. I have nothing else. Elias, no family, no legacy. Just the company." Elias looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the tremble in her jaw, the rigid posture she held to keep from shivering, the desperate hollow fear hiding behind her fierce eyes. He didn't offer pity. He offered a harsh, undeniable truth. "Then you built the wrong legacy," Elias said. Vanessa squeezed her eyes shut. The words hit her like a physical blow precisely because she knew he was right. She opened her eyes, looking out over the misty pasture, the cattle, the ancient tree. "I can't destroy this," Vanessa said, her voice barely audible over the idling ATV engine. "Even to save myself, I won't do it." Elias slowly lowered his coffee cup. He stared at her profile, searching for the lie, the corporate pivot. He found nothing but raw, defeated honesty. The shark had just voluntarily pulled out her own teeth. A heavy silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant lowing call of a calf. Elias sighed, a long, rough sound that seemed to pull from the very bottom of his lungs. He reached over and tapped his knuckles lightly against her muddy knee. "Your engineers are lazy," Elias said quietly. Vanessa turned her head confused. "What?" "I said your engineers are lazy," Elias repeated. He pointed up toward the jagged peaks of the mountains to the north, far beyond the road's hospitality property line. They saw a straight line and stopped looking. But if they had mapped the old logging cuts on the ridge, they would have seen the northern gradient. Vanessa's brow furrowed. The northern gradient is federal land. Bureau of Land Management. We can't tap that aquifer. "No, but I can," Elias said, his grey eyes locking onto hers, a sudden sharp intelligence burning in them. Whispering Pines holds a century-old grandfathered agricultural lease on the northern ridge runoff. We don't use it. It's too far to pump for cattle, but the gravity feed runs straight down the mountain right past the back of your property line. Vanessa felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her freezing body. "You own the rights to the ridge water. I own the access," Elias corrected. "And I don't need it." He looked at her ruined, mud-caked boots. He looked at the blood drying on her knuckles. "I won't let you touch the lower pasture, Vanessa," Elias said, using her first name for the very first time. The sound of it in his gravelly voice sent a strange, warm shiver up her spine. "But I might be willing to lease you the northern runoff rights. If you build the reservoir on your own land." Vanessa stared at him, her mind spinning the corporate calculus, instantly trying to re-engage, but getting tangled in something entirely new. Gratitude. Profound, staggering gratitude. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "After how I treated you. Why would you do that?" Elias looked away, staring out at the river. The corner of his mouth twitched into a faint, self-deprecating smile. "Because a busted tractor taught me that sometimes things just need a different belt to run right," Elias said softly. "And because I think you've finally washed enough of that city dirt off you to see straight." The water in the Copper Creek Motor Inn shower ran brown for a full 3 minutes. Vanessa stood under the asthmatic spray, letting the lukewarm water turn the mud on her skin back into liquid. It pooled around the drain, thick and heavy with river silt. Her knuckles stung sharply, where the harsh motel soap caught the jagged scrape from the cottonwood branch. She didn't flinch. She watched the dirt wash away, feeling an intense, unfamiliar exhaustion settling deep into her marrow. It wasn't the frantic, caffeinated burnout of a New York board meeting. It was a heavy, physical quiet. She stepped out, dried off with a scratchy towel that smelled of bleach, and pulled on a clean, sharp suit. She tied her hair back. She applied her makeup with mechanical precision. She was putting the armor back on, but the plates felt different now. Looser. Less necessary. When she walked into the construction trailer an hour later, the air conditioning was humming aggressively. David and the engineering team were huddled over the topographical map, picking at stale donuts. They froze when the door banged shut. Vanessa walked to the head of the laminate table. She didn't sit down. She placed both hands flat on the blueprints, right over the red line, cutting through the lower pasture. "Scrap the trench," Vanessa said. Her voice was calm. It wasn't a negotiation. David blinked behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Excuse me, Miss Rhodes. The environmental board deadline is—" "I know when the deadline is, David. We are not digging through the whispering pines lower pasture. The soil is alluvial. It will ruin the water table and flood the acreage." The lead structural engineer let out a short, incredulous laugh. "With all due respect, Vanessa, we don't care if the local rancher gets some puddles. The easement is the only way this resort opens." Vanessa's eyes snapped to the engineer. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You will care because I care. And I sign your checks. Erase the line." She reached across the table, grabbed a black Sharpie, and drew a thick, jagged line from the northern edge of their property line up toward the ridge of the Bitterroot Mountains. "We are pumping from the Northern Ridge runoff," she announced. "Whispering Pines holds a grandfathered agricultural lease on the water. They are transferring the access rights to us." David scrambled for his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. "The North Ridge, Vanessa, that's a steep gradient. The pumping infrastructure alone will cost an extra $4.5 million. We don't have that in the contingency budget." "Then we find it," Vanessa snapped. "Cut the imported Italian marble in the lobby. Use local slate. Downgrade the fixtures in the outer cabins. Cancel the custom mahogany doors and use local timber. I don't care what you have to strip down. You will find $4.5 million by tomorrow morning, or I will find a new project manager." The trailer was dead silent. The engineers stared at her, stunned. She had spent the last 2 years obsessing over the hyper-luxurious details of the summit site, berating anyone who suggested a cheaper alternative. Now she was tearing out the marble to save a muddy cow pasture. "Get to work," she said, turning on her heel and walking out into the blinding afternoon sun. 2 days later, she met Elias at Ruby's diner. It was 3 in the afternoon, the dead hour between lunch and dinner. The diner smelled heavily of bleach and old coffee. Elias was sitting in the same back booth, wearing a clean grey Henley, his forearms resting on the cracked vinyl table. Vanessa slid into the booth across from him. She didn't bring her legal team. She didn't bring the leather-bound portfolios her company usually used for acquisitions. She slid a single stapled document across the table. 2 pages, Vanessa said. No non-competes, no hidden liability clauses, no arbitration traps. You grant us subsurface pipe access strictly along the northern ridge fence line and the rights to the runoff. We pay you $500,000 a year for the lease. Elias picked up the paper. He didn't rush. He read every line, his pale grey eyes tracking methodically across the ink. The diner's refrigerator hummed loudly in the background. 500,000, Elias murmured, tapping his index finger against the paper. That's a lot for water I don't use. It's a fraction of what you would have gotten for the lower pasture, Vanessa replied evenly. But it clears your medical debt in 2 years, and it keeps my excavators 10 miles away from your wild blue flax. Elias looked up. He studied her face, searching for the shark, the corporate predator, who had tried to throw a $100 bill at his chest on a dusty county road. He picked up a cheap plastic diner pen left on the table. He clicked it once, pressed it to the paper, and signed his name in a sharp, angled scrawl. He slid the paper back to her. Done, Elias said. Vanessa stared at the signature. The $80 million crisis was over. The board would be satisfied. Her job was safe. She had won. But as she folded the paper and put it in her bag, she didn't feel the familiar, toxic rush of conquest. She just felt an immense, quiet relief. Thank you, she said, and for the first time in her career, she meant it entirely. Elias leaned back against the vinyl. You ruined your boots. I threw them in the motel dumpster. Vanessa admitted, a faint, genuine smile breaking across her face. They were terrible for the mud, anyway. Elias chuckled, a low, gravelly sound that made the air in the diner feel instantly warmer. Next time you decide to play farmer, let me know. I'll lend you some rubber muck boots. They don't look like much, but they keep the freezing water out. May arrived in Montana with a violent, beautiful urgency. The snowmelt turned the river into a roaring, frothing beast, and the valley exploded into an aggressive, vibrant green. The air smelled of damp pine needles and blooming sage. The summit site was officially open. Vanessa stood on the expansive cedar deck of the main lodge, a glass of untouched champagne in her hand. The deck was crowded with investors, board members, and minor celebrities, all wearing clothes that cost more than the cars parked in the town of Copper Creek. A string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely drowned out by the loud, self-important chatter of wealth congratulating itself. The resort was a masterpiece. The local slate and timber gave it a rugged, grounded authenticity that the Italian marble never would have achieved. The media was already calling it the premier eco-luxury destination of the decade. Brilliant pivot on the water rights, Vanessa. Richard, the chairman of the board, said, clinking his heavy crystal glass against hers. He smelled of expensive cigars and gin. You handled those local hicks perfectly, got what we needed, and kept them out of our hair. Vanessa looked at Richard. She saw the soft, uncalloused hands. She saw the manicured ignorance. A sudden sharp wave of nausea rolled through her stomach. "Excuse me," she said abruptly, setting her full champagne glass on a passing waiter's tray. She walked away from the deck, away from the music, away from the sterile, perfectly curated wilderness her company had built. She walked down the crushed gravel path past the security perimeter, and kept going until the noise of the gala faded into the rush of the wind through the pines. She walked for 20 minutes until she reached the heavy, rough-hewn timber fence that marked the property line. On the other side was whispering pines. She leaned her forearms against the top rail. The wood was rough, snagging the silk of her tailored sleeve. She didn't care. She breathed in the cool evening air, letting the silence of the valley wash over her. Down in the distance near the riverbank, she saw a splash of color. It was subtle, but in the fading light the clusters of wild blue flax were unmistakable. They were blooming. A low, rhythmic chugging sound broke the quiet. Vanessa turned her head. Rolling slowly along the fence line, puffing a modest grey cloud of diesel smoke into the twilight, was the 1968 John Deere 4020. Elias was behind the wheel. He saw her standing at the fence and eased back on the hand throttle. The heavy machine idled, shaking gently. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was vast and heavy. Elias climbed down. He was wearing faded work jeans and a canvas jacket, his hands dark with grease and topsoil. He walked over to the fence, stopping just a few feet away on his side of the property line. "You're missing your party," Elias said. His voice was low, carrying effortlessly in the quiet air. "I don't belong at that party," Vanessa said quietly. Elias rested his boot on the lower rail of the fence. He looked past her toward the glowing amber lights of the massive resort on the hill. "You built it." "I funded it," Vanessa corrected, looking down at her hands. Her knuckles were completely healed, leaving only a faint white scar where the cottonwood branch had bitten her. "But I don't think I understand what it means to build something." "Not really. Not the way you do." Elias looked back at her. The harsh, defensive glare he'd worn in the diner months ago was gone. His pale grey eyes were steady, stripped of pretense, seeing right through the expensive suit to the exhausted, shifting woman beneath it. "The tractor sounds good," Vanessa noted, nodding toward the rusted machine. Elias smiled. It was a slow, genuine thing that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Machined a new pulley. Swapped the belt. It runs a little rough, but it pulls straight. Sometimes that's all you need," Vanessa said softly. They stood there for a long time, the sky bruised into a deep violet, and the first stars punched through the canopy of the encroaching night. There was a fence between them, a barrier of wire and wood separating two entirely different worlds. But as the wind picked up, carrying the sweet, clean scent of blooming flax from the lower pasture, Vanessa realized she wasn't looking at an obstacle anymore. She was looking at an anchor. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a worn, slightly greasy $100 bill. She held it out across the fence line. Elias looked at the money. He raised an eyebrow. "I thought we settled the lease." "We did," Vanessa said, a cynical, soft smile touching her lips. "This is for a pair of rubber muck boots, size 8. I figure if I'm going to spend my weekends out here, I should probably stop ruining my shoes." Elias stared at the bill, then up at her face. The silence stretched heavy with the weight of an unspoken tectonic shift in both of their lives. Slowly he reached across the rough timber. He didn't take the money. Instead, his calloused, dirt-stained fingers closed gently over her hand, holding it steady in the cooling night air. "Keep your money, Vanessa," Elias said, his voice a low, rough anchor in the dark. "I'll buy the boots. If you loved this raw, grounded journey of collision and connection, let us know by hitting that like button. Vanessa and Elias's story proves that sometimes the greatest power isn't in bulldozing the obstacles in our path, but in having the courage to stop, get your hands dirty, and listen. What did you think of Vanessa's ultimate choice? Drop a comment below with your favorite moment. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder about what truly matters, and subscribe for more deeply human stories that cut through the noise. See you in the next one.